There's so much nuance and there's just so much, like, if you change one little thing, it's throwing off your entire month. So now you like the chances of you getting pregnant, you had that 25% chance, but the fact that his sperm are not great is then contributing, making it harder for you to get pregnant.
Welcome to the Woman's Doctor podcast, helping empower women to embrace their body and soul's full potential. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, and after 22 years of working with patients, I found the answers to our health struggles are much deeper than most people realize. To help explore this, I'm interviewing colleagues and other wellness experts to get to the root cause so women can realize their true beauty and be informed decision makers for themselves and their loved ones. Did you know that a woman's uterus is about the size of a pear, but can expand to the size of a watermelon during pregnancy? The female body is so miraculous in many ways, and we cover some of those amazing ways in today's episode of the Woman's Doctor podcast. My guest today is Dr. Aumatma. She is a double board certified naturopathic doctor and endocrinologist, practiced for 15 years. She supports couples to create the family of their dreams and also trains doctors who want to specialize in fertility. She's best-selling author of Fertility Secrets, What Your Doctor Didn't Tell You About Baby Making. She's also the host of Egg Meets Sperm and has been featured on TV shows like ABC, Fox, and CBS. In today's interview, we bust some common myths around fertility, and Dr. Aumatma shares her top secrets on how to optimize fertility, and even ways that you can do this before you're thinking about getting pregnant. All on this episode of the Woman's Doctor podcast. Aumatma, it's so great to see you. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was also fantastic interviewing you for the Hormones, Health, and Harmony docu-series and seeing you in person. I love doing those interviews in person, but we do Zoom when we have to do that as well.
Oh, it was such a beautiful retreat and just so amazing. Like the brilliance that was in the room. Like I am so excited for this docuseries.
Yeah, me too. Well, today we're talking about fertility, but before we dive into that, can you tell a bit about what got you into being interested in this and naturopathic medicine?
Yeah, so I was already a naturopathic doctor by the time I decided to do fertility. And I can't even say that I decided because it was literally like I fell into it because of my own story. And I woke up married one day. Didn't happen suddenly. That was like a 10-year process. Got married. And even leading up to the wedding, I had been like, I'm not sure I'm marrying the right person. And then he started talking about kids and literally my reproductive system just went like, absolutely no, that is not happening. And I could feel like that intensity in my body every time this man talked about kids. And I was like, oh crap, I really am with the wrong person. And if I go the rate I've been going, it's going to take me another 10 years to find someone. And that might mean I'll never have kids. So I really went into, and I like just dove into research and like reviewed everything I had learned in naturopathic school, which honestly I felt like wasn't a lot related to fertility. And as I dove into the research, I just got more and more agitated that women are being like, we're being lied to. We have this like idea that fertility is going to just drop off of a cliff at a certain age, but in reality, like that's not what's happening in our bodies at all. So when I realized that that is a myth that I can choose whether or not I buy into, and then reading, you probably are in love with this book as much as I am, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, which is like a classic on our shelves for women's health. Dr. Christian Northrup talks about fertility in parts of the world where women were having babies at 60, and that was their norm. And I was like, well, if that's the human potential, then how can we do fertility differently? And that's really what got me into this field. And I just started sharing about what I was learning in my research, and people were like, great, maybe you can help me. And that's how I like fell into the fertility world.
Oh my gosh, that's such an interesting story. And I know there are so many myths around women's health in general,
Yeah.
but also around fertility. And I think a lot of the myths around women's health go hand in hand with aging, like myths around aging and our health. And that, you have to have children before you're 35. And magically, when you turn 35, that's a geriatric pregnancy, right?
Right, right, right. Because suddenly something changed. And we know that for everything in our body, nothing is sudden, right? Everything is a process and it's like happening over time. So we can't really say, like, oh, this is the cutoff, right? And with the 35 thing, so I traced it down. I was like, where did this actually start? It starts in France in the 1800s, not in science, but in churches, because the churches noted that, oh, women are not bringing their children to get baptized after the age of 35. Now, in the 1800s, like, how much longer did women live over 35? You know what I mean? Like, so many of them were dying in childbirth, so many of them were just not surviving super long. Maybe they were living till 40, 45. I didn't like dig into what the average age span was, but it was certainly shorter than it is now. And so, sure, women didn't bring their children in after that age. It could be simply that they got married at 20 and they were like, I'm done having kids. Like, I don't want any more kids. Um, so, there could have been a lot of reasons why that happened, but they assumed that because that had happened, after 35, children are not getting baptized. So, it must mean women are not fertile. And I'm like, well, that's a dumb assumption to make. Like, where's the science of this? So, there are actually countries that are questioning this. It hasn't come to the US yet, but there are, I believe there's some studies that have come out in Switzerland, in Sweden, a couple different countries in Europe that are trying to do comparison studies between the age groups of 25 and 29 and 35 and 39. And most of what they're finding is there's a 3% decline. 3% between those two age groups. So, sure, like I've told my Western colleagues this, and they'll be like, well, but those are really small studies. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a study versus a church. Like, uh,
Yeah.
so I personally am like, yes, they're small studies. They've done these studies with like groups of 100, 200 women, which is not a huge substantial amount, but we need more studies, right? Like we need more science to actually determine if this is the truth or not. And I think I'm leaning more towards this is not the truth, especially because so many women get pregnant over 35. So many women don't have issues getting pregnant over 35. So I think it's like, it's a bad idea to like plant in the head of a woman who is maybe 30 and is like, well, I don't have the right person yet, and I don't want to rush into having children. And she should have that choice. I truly believe that we should have the choice of who to have a child with, when to have that child, and in the process of that, know how to empower our bodies so that we can have the child when we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a question that might seem a little bit different, but it's actually related. Is fertility on the decline? Is it like
Yes.
the fertility rates declining?
Yeah, they are actually declining. Uh, and I don't think we have as many studies from the female side, but we have a lot of statistics from men's fertility. So in the last 75 years, sperm counts were considered average was 120 million. That was the average. So the average male was walking around with 120 million sperm at any given time in one ejaculation. Now the average has gone down to 20 million. So that's
Wow.
a pretty steep decline. And we see that kind of decline in motility, which on average was considered normal at 75%. Now decreased that to 50%. And morphology, the average was 12%. We've decreased that to 4%. So on all sperm parameters, we have decided as a society, like, yeah, the average is declining. So let's just change what we consider normal and call it a day. But I was speaking to one of my male colleagues who is like a urologist and an expert in men's health. And he said if we're going at the same rate that we've been going on the men's side, men are going to be completely infertile in 20 years. 20 years. Like that's in
Wow.
our lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy. And it's interesting though. You look at the population of the world, and the population's still growing. So it's an interesting thing, but and it's not because people. I know one person said to me, "Oh, that's because people are trying to have children older." But that's not why. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about. This is not related to age. This is just men in
In
general.
general. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is men between the ages of 18 and 35. So we're not even talking
Oh.
about men over 35.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty incredible. So what can we do? Both men and women play a role in
Yes.
fertility, right? So what can we do for people who really are wanting to have a family, expand their family? What can we do?
Yeah, there's so much. I feel like the first step I tell all of our couples is like, we need to know why you're struggling with fertility. So if it is, I think it's a slightly different path. If we're talking about fertility preservation or like what can we do to like have babies later in life, then we can have that chat. And then if we're talking about like, hey, this couple's been struggling for so many years, what can they do? Um, I just talked to a couple yesterday the woman is 35, the guy is 36. And the guy didn't have his semen analysis yet, but they've been struggling for fertility for 3 years. The guy hasn't been tested. The woman, her hormones look actually pretty optimal, even from the naturopathic functional medicine side. And I was like, well, something else is going on. So tell me about your periods. I'm like, just trying to dig deeper, right? And she's like, oh, so I have a week of spotting before my cycle and a week of spotting after my cycle. And I almost wanted to cry. I was like, well, yeah, you can't have a child with that much spotting. Like, your hormones are out of whack for sure. And she's like, I've suspected this. I've said this literally to every doctor I have met, and they all tell me I'm crazy because my day 3 hormones always look amazing. And I was like, yeah, we need to do a different type of test to figure out what's happening with your hormones through the entire cycle so that we don't miss something and we're not like shooting in the dark and hoping for the best, but really like understanding what it is that's leading to the struggle that you're having.
Yeah, amazing. And so there are all these doctors that miss that never talk to her about it.
Yeah, she said she has literally told this to every doctor, and every single person that she has talked to says, "Oh, that's not a problem, no big deal. That's not keeping you from getting pregnant."
Wow.
And we know as naturopathic doctors, like if you're spotting for that week before your period, that means you have deficiency progesterone. And if you're spotting a week after your period, she actually described like her period stops and then 5 days later she's bleeding again. And that it's like a full bleed. It's not really like a spotting where she doesn't need anything to protect. So I was like, well, that sounds like estrogen issue. And it sounds like a progesterone deficiency on the other side. So we really like, you know, based on symptoms, I have kind of an assumption of what's happening. But I was definitely like, I can't believe no one has suggested that there be something besides like assuming that this is normal.
Yeah, and that he hasn't had his sperm count tested, and that
'Cause
they're just assuming it's all on her.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. Okay. Let's let you know it's important to be thorough. I mean, I think a lot of times doctors just they first of all, they're limited by a lot of doctors are limited by the amount of time they have. So they might skip things or they might try to rush through things. It's so important to really take time with patients and listen to them. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I learn the most when I'm listening, right? And like you want like I feel like we're uniquely trained to ask different types of questions, right? And we're also like we have a different approach in how things fit together. So when I have their first consultation, it's probably going to be in a couple of weeks. When I meet with them, I want to know about her gut. I want to know like how are you digesting your food? What other symptoms do you have? Do you have thyroid issues? Like things that most other doctors are like, well, that's not related to fertility. But there's data on all of this, right? Like I can say in 2017, there was a study that came out that essentially proved that if you have gut inflammation, you also have uterine inflammation. They're going hand in hand. Similarly, there's data coming out now about if you have dysbiosis in the gut, your uterine microbiome is going to be suboptimal and it's going to potentially lead to bacterial vaginosis, other type like candida, yeast, whatever in infections in your reproductive area. And all of those organisms make it almost impossible for the embryo to be able to implant in the uterus. So fertility rates are going down, but it has to do with it started in the gut. Now it's in your uterine microbiome. And if you don't address those underlying things, you're really like doing a disservice to yourself. And then you're getting frustrated because the stuff like trying on your own is not working or IVF hasn't worked. This couple has been through 3 IVF cycles. It's
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
what?
Wow. Well, and I think you made a really good point there about the microbiome. There's a lot of talk about the gut microbiome, but I think a lot of people don't realize that we have microbiota all over the body, including the
Yeah.
uterus. And that's definitely not something that's talked about. I think there's vaginal flora is talked about somewhat more so now than it used to be.
Mhm.
But I'm really glad that you brought that up because it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's new, right? Like we knew that there was microbiome everywhere, but it's fairly recent that they're trying to study what microbes are in our uterus, cervix, all of the reproductive area. And the key takeaway, like I'm going to simplify all of the research into like one sentence, which is your gut microbiome is extreme diversity. Like that's what you want in the gut. However, diversity in your vagina, uterus, and reproductive region is the worst thing you can have. So you want mostly lactobacillus, and that's it. And they've seen studies where like the more diversity in your reproductive area, the more prone you are to infections and infertility.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Crazy.
thank you for pointing that out. That's interesting. I was not aware of that. And of course, the research is continuing to tell us more about that. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. And for someone who is not quite like they're not trying to get pregnant right now, they're not struggling to get pregnant, but they know they want to have a family down the road. What are things that women can do now to start planning ahead if you have time?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is, and I mention this only because, not because I practice or not because I want to do this, but egg freezing is the well accepted way to do fertility preservation. So basically they take a bunch of your eggs, they freeze them. If you're already married or you know in a partnership that you know is going to you want to be the future father of your children, freezing embryos is a better idea than freezing eggs. However, and actually not even however, a lot of companies are now offering this as a benefit, which is amazing, right? Like this is really like the companies use this as a way of like, hey, you can work longer for us before you go and take your maternity leave and potentially never come back, right? So they're giving these things out as benefits, which is great. It's like, okay, we are to a certain extent giving women options. However, the biggest downfall that I see with that is we think we have this insurance plan. It's kind of like having car insurance and then driving like a maniac for the rest of your life because you have car insurance. Nobody does that, right? It's great. It's good insurance, but you still have to take care of your body. Your body is still deteriorating. Your uterus is still impacted if you're not taking care of it in your body. So they're not freezing your uterus, they're only freezing your ovaries. And the idea that frozen eggs will always turn into babies is just not true. The most the stats, they don't have like, I don't think I've seen studies that are like out of these number of eggs we got one baby or two babies, but on average 1% of frozen eggs turn into live babies. 1%.
Wow.
So in general, I think that it's like if you have the resources or you have a job that's giving you this benefit, absolutely do it, right? Like freeze your eggs. It's a good idea. But also, what else are you going to do for yourself? And I think the biggest things, I come from the Bay Area where like women get these benefits all the time and they think that that was going to work and that's it. And then I see what they're doing in their life and I'm like, but you're working 80-hour work weeks and partying every time you're not working and like drinking and like the lifestyle that kind of goes with hand in hand with this idea that I have this insurance policy and I no longer have to worry about my fertility and my hormones is almost detrimental to future outcomes. So the first thing I'll say is like stress. I know stress is like such a big can of worms for everybody, but I'm not saying to go live in a bubble, but you have to find that work-life balance. You have to, like, most of our couples are badasses. Like, these women have decided that they're going to be a total badass, and I feel like the biggest thing is like how to find that balance. Learn to slow down. Learn to ask for support. You don't have to do it all yourself, right? Like do the little things now so that you don't have to do the big things later. So stress is a big one. Sleep. Don't compromise your sleep for anything. Get at least 7 to 8 hours, and that can vary based on who you are as a person. So some body types need more sleep, some body types can get away with a little less, but on average 7 to 8 hours. Drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes and the new one, marijuana, is potentially detrimental. However, if you're freezing your eggs at 25, it's a kind of a farce expectation to say like, oh, you're not going to drink for the next 20 years till you have a child, right? Like nobody's going to sign up for that. But at least like cut back. Don't drink massively, right? Don't get pitch black drunk every weekend. Like that's not going to support your fertility no matter what you do. And realize that it does add up. So the impact that alcohol is having is not just on your fertility or your hormones, but it's destroying your gut microbiome, which we just talked about the importance of. It's destroying your liver. So just kind of like reining it in a little bit and finding a balance is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of this is just so important anyway. So, I mean, that way we get to feel amazing. I mean, I haven't had a drink since August of last year. I stopped drinking alcohol, and I can't believe how great I feel. I went so long with drinking just, and I wasn't, it was like a little bit of wine here and there. I certainly had my days of partying back in college, but it's amazing how great I feel. And I think that we forget that if, even if that whatever substance has worn off, it's still playing, it has an impact on our body, not just short term, but it can be long term too. So just be smart about it. I'm not saying that everybody has to stop drinking,
Mhm.
but I think that anything that we can do to support our bodies and nourishing it and providing a healthy lifestyle is going to help us, whether it's fertility or just living a really long, healthy life free of symptoms like PMS and period pain and infertility and acne and all these things
Right.
that so many women
Absolutely.
struggle with, right?
Absolutely. And like I think we've normalized these symptoms to the point where you go to the doctor and you're like, I have really intense period pain. And the doctor is like, yeah, so take some Advil, take some Tylenol, do, like, here, go away, take this birth control pill. And that's it. Like that, I don't think that it's normal for us to be in pain for days on end in our cycles. I don't think that the pain is intolerable, I feel like that's usually a sign of something deeper. So I feel like our bodies are talking to us, and when you're having these symptoms, you really like pause and say, "Hey, is this an outcome of something I'm doing in my life, or do I need to go see somebody so that I can figure out why this symptom is popping up right now?" And and like when I say go see somebody, it's not somebody who's going to give you a prescription to make it go away. Because the band-aid on the symptom is not really fixing the underlying problem, right? Like the band-aid is only hiding the fact that you have this. So if you need to take Advil every time you have a period, that's covering up the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many options in naturopathic medicine to help with fertility, right? To help enhance fertility. Uh, and so can you mention a few of those things that you do in your practice to help and help support fertility?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the hormones is a big piece of what we do. So when people's hormones are imbalanced, meaning they don't have the right estrogen amounts, the right progesterone amounts, or the balance between the two at the various points in their cycle, that is often leading to poorer egg quality and more symptoms with cycles. And those hormones are signaling compounds to support fertility outcomes, right? Like our body wants us to reproduce. That's mammalian nature. So if it's not happening, then something is out of whack to make it not happen. So I think the hormone balancing piece is a really big piece of what we do. We also um, tend towards nutrient replenishment or nutrient optimization, where a lot of I found that in the fertility world, more and more, even reproductive endocrinologists will give a list of supplements that they want their patients on, right? Like, here's your list, go take all these supplements. But no one is educating on what is the quality of the supplement that you're picking up from Costco or Walmart or Walgreens. What is the absorbability of that supplement? And how many other toxins is that putting into your body? So if you read a label and the other ingredients list is longer than the list of what's in your supplement, it's probably not a good idea. That's just the basic, right? But the quality of the nutrient, the like what is it bound to, like all of that is such a big science that really needs someone to look at and say, no, don't take this, maybe take this one. And really like sift through your garbage bag full of supplements. Most of these women are coming in with a garbage bag, like, here's all my supplements. What should I do with this? Like, why do you have so many supplements, first of all? But they're literally like, here's the list, or here's what I found on the internet. I'm just taking everything. And unfortunately, there's some things that I have repeatedly seen to be either the wrong things or the wrong thing at the right thing at the wrong time. So Vitex, for example, I love Vitex. I'm not shitting on Vitex, but Vitex is really specific for a very specific outcome. So a lot of women hear about Vitex and they're like, oh, I'm trying to get pregnant. I'll take Vitex too. And within a couple of cycles, their cycles shorten to like 23 days. And I've seen these women in my practice and they're like, I started taking this thing and now I have a 23-day cycle. What happened? And I'm like, well, you didn't need the Vitex. That's what happened.
Yeah. Is it just because of the progesterone? It increases progesterone when it's not needed?
No. So Vitex doesn't actually increase progesterone. That is what the studies say.
Okay.
It will support progesterone production for sure.
Right.
But you taking Vitex through your whole cycle could potentially throw that follicular phase off. So what's happening is that it's shortening the follicular phase because it's increasing LH. So if Vitex's main hormone effect is on LH, not on progesterone. So it like compresses the time that it takes to get that LH surge. So then you're ovulating that much faster and you're maybe releasing your egg on cycle day 8 instead of 12 or 13. And then you still have your normal like 10 or 12 day luteal phase, which is good, but you ovulated too early. So now you have a super short cycle.
So what is wrong with having an early ovulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it could be totally fine for some women. So this is going to be a generalization, but different women have different ovulation times. I ovulate on cycle day 9 and I got pregnant just fine. But it depends on what your hormones are doing leading up to ovulation. So sometimes when women are having cycle day 8, 9 ovulation, they're estrogen dominant and the estrogen is building up too quickly because the follicles are being developed too quickly. And when you develop follicles too fast, estrogen will go up and then cause the LH surge. But if those follicles didn't have enough time to develop, then it's kind of like the employee that's just like chugging away and busting out whatever you need, but isn't like actually paying attention to the details. So there are lots of mistakes. And essentially those eggs or those follicles are not great enough to produce a baby. So that could be one of the reasons that ovulating too early is just as problematic as ovulating too late. Ovulating too late is like the opposite problem. The egg didn't mature quickly enough, or it matured and then sat there and didn't get the signal to be released. And that is also poorer egg quality because the egg has been now sitting in the ovaries for 3 days and it didn't need to. So either direction, there's like a Goldilocks zone of where it's great, and then any too soon or too late can be detrimental to egg quality, essentially.
Yeah. It's amazing that any of us ever get pregnant.
It is. It totally
Yeah.
is. There's like so, and that's a good myth for us to talk about actually, because
Mm.
most of us were, I don't know about you, but when I was young, I feel like all I remember from our health class was like, make sure to not have sex or you're gonna get pregnant.
Right.
Right? Like essentially it's going to be an instant thing, and there's going to be there's no way to avoid it and all that kind of stuff. And in reality, there's only a 25% chance of getting pregnant in any given cycle. 25%.
Yeah.
And that's if you timed everything perfectly, right? Like if you had sex just before ovulation or just during ovulation, then yay, you have a 25% chance. But if you didn't know when you were ovulating, you didn't time it correctly, the sperm weren't good, the egg wasn't good, whatever, all of those factors are now decreasing the chances of getting pregnant in that given cycle. So it's not a surprise that so many women and so many couples are struggling with this, because there's so much nuance, and there's just so much like if you change one little thing, it's throwing off your entire month. So now you like the chances of you getting pregnant, you had that like 25% chance, but the fact that his sperm are not great is then contributing, making it harder for you to get pregnant. Or your egg quality isn't great, making it harder to get pregnant. You didn't get enough sleep, or you were too stressed out during the follicular phase when your egg was being formed, detrimental to egg quality. So like so many things that can just be like, yeah, well, that's that, there goes that cycle. Let's just hope better for the next one.
Well, the good news is that there are plenty of things like we were been talking about to do to support.
Absolutely.
And so it can happen, and we can increase our possibility to get pregnant. So, well, Aumatma, this has been so fascinating, so interesting. Will you please tell everyone where they can learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is www.holisticfertilityinstitute.com, and our Instagram is holistic_fertility_expert. So holistic fertility expert on Instagram.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait to share your message in the Hormones, Health, and Harmony docuseries.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Woman's Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with the women in your life. And to learn all about balancing hormones, join us for the Hormones, Health, and Harmony docuseries at thewomansdoctor.com.